if power can be used to give away favors, it follows that people are going to compete to get those favors, and in fact, they're very successful in doing so. So many policies get implemented because they're to the benefit of a small minority of people, and they're at the cost of everybody else. One of my favorite examples of this is, say, sugar subsidies and corn tariffs in the US. We know, I mean, economists have known this for hundreds of years, that those are really a bad thing, but the reason we have them is because a small number of people like ADM and a couple other companies will lobby the government intensely for that. They have all the benefits concentrated on them, and the cost of this is diffused among the many. When I teach my students about this in class in DC, I say, how many of you are going to go lobby your Congress people to get rid of this today? Like, Congress is just down there, 20 minutes away, and you can do it. You can take an Uber for like $8, and you can be there, and you can go lobby your congressperson. They have office hours like I do. And none of them ever do it, and the reason is because the cost to them of lobbying is higher than the prospective benefit. So there are all sorts of corrupt things that happen. This, I think, this sort of phenomenon about who gets staffed inside of government agencies, why is it that the regulators often just pick the people who worked in the industry to do the regulations? I think this is explained by the phenomenon of rent seeking. I think it's a sort of post-electoral phenomenon. It's endemic to representative governments. You wouldn't get an indirect democracy, but I wouldn't blame the voters for that. Like, I think it's just a separate problem that happens in representative government, or actually even in non-democracy, we have even more of it. This might not be exactly what you're getting at, but here's something I would say. I'm focusing a lot on national elections. I do use a lot of American examples, though, to be clear. Like, you know, the Brits, I think, are a little bit better educated on average than Americans, but like in other countries, people also don't know anything. Like, levels of ignorance are just basically the same everywhere. They're even the same in Australia, where you're forced to vote. But on local elections, people do better. They know more. It's easier to vote well on local elections where you can kind of just look around and go, yeah, there's something wrong with the school district, and it's easier to figure out what to do about it. So I think of this as sort of at the level of, say, provinces or states or federal, like national level politics. That's what we're focused on. I think democracy works better at the local level, which is why, like, I think Switzerland has such good politics. I'm a big fan of Switzerland. They do a lot of stuff at the local level and make good decisions there. And then when it comes to the federal national election, you get 29% turnout, and who are the 29% of the voters? They're the most informed. And just to be clear, I'm definitely not advocating for the rule of experts. Though I'd love to be a dictator, I'm sure I'd have a good time with that. Like, I'm not talking about a narrow technocracy in which only a few people with PhDs get to rule. Like, I do not want the philosophy department at my school to run the country. I think that would, especially at my school, that would be a disaster. What I'm talking about is a system in which voting is very widespread. If you were to implement some of the ideas I talk about in this book, that would mean like the number of voters in the US would be higher than the total population of, say, Australia, even on the most restrictive form of epistocracy. Voting is very widespread, but it's concentrated, the power is concentrated in some way among the people that have more information. But nevertheless, we're still talking about tens of millions of people voting. And one of the reasons why this is important is because there is a wisdom of the crowds phenomenon. Right? And so in chapter 7 of the book, I discuss 3 theorems that are supposed to explain when does the crowd have wisdom. There's certain things like, if this were full of jelly beans, and I were to ask you, do you call them jelly beans here? Yes, thank you. I was in another country recently, and they called them something else, so I'm very careful with that one. If I had a jar full of jelly beans here, and I asked each person, like, how many do you think it is? Your guess is likely to be off. But if we average all your guesses together, it turns out that like the more people we add, the closer the group will come to getting the right answer. So that works for jelly beans. It doesn't actually work for politics. And so I have a discussion of like, when does it work and when doesn't it? So some of these theorems, what they say is it's important to have 2 heads are better than 1, 10,000 heads are better than 2, but maybe 50 million heads is too much. Like it really does, for these theorems that explain when the crowd has wisdom to work, it only works, these theorems only work if people are pretty well informed and pretty smart.
Okay, Jason, we've got probably one more round of questions. Make it very quick. We've got 2 questions here and then 1 question to the lady in the end over that. So throw the thing around.
Okay, thank you very much for your talk. I want to pick up on the issue of incentives. And I want to ask you, in your answer to the previous gentleman over there about scale, surely the greatest incentive we have is, you know, what's nearest and dearest to us. So you said local elections work. The reason local elections work is because there's a huge incentive, because if something's happening in my street, I care about it. So then you said, well, we can't have, you know, the wisdom of crowds doesn't really work because, you know, you can't scale things up. I'd put it to you, I was slightly disappointed about the level of debate. I thought we might get some alternatives around anarcho-syndicalism, around Mondragon, around, you know, true libertarianism, anarchism, where you get consensus working, yeah, and people are hugely motivated because their decisions actually are effective. Do you think it's possible to have a system of consensus decision making at a really low, you know, sort of local level, which then can be democratized up to a national level?
Okay, great. Next, all on that. You're going to get thrown it again.
Thank you very much. In a sense, my question is unfair. I have not read your book, so I don't know if you deal with this already somewhere very extensively. And also leads on quite nicely from the question that was asked right before. On the surface, it sounds bold and brave. You're rejecting democracy such as it exists, and that's attractive. That's why people are buying your book, and that's why people are here. But the reason you give is that basically there are poor incentives in our society for people to want to spend the time to do good politics, to engage in democracy in the right kinds of ways. But that sounds to me, and maybe to traditional critical theorists, as much more of a diagnosis of something that's wrong, a diagnosis of a disease in the kind of societies in which we live, basically one where there are perverse incentives. If our incentives lead us to lack of interest in democracy, then why not change them towards incentives that actually encourage civic virtue? And this is something that both conservative and more progressive authors would probably agree on as being something that's worth doing. So why not work on that instead of just dismissing the question at hand?
Okay, and then quickly, just one last one over there.
Yeah.
She's already got a mic.
I have one. I'm ready. I'm ready to ask a question. I have actually read your book, and when I was reading it, it reminded me of another debate in 1920s between John Dewey and his critics. So his critics focused on similar things like incompetence, irrationality in the voters that they saw. But for John Dewey, it was more about the capacity that we can have, our potential to have some empathy, to be altruistic, to be rational, to come up with something better than we currently are. And so my question, I guess, is linked to some of the empirical data that I work with personally. I'm sure you're familiar with Fishkin's work on deliberative polling, participatory budgeting that has been around for more than 25 years, and some of the results are astonishing. Iceland literally crowdsourced their constitution a year and a half ago. We see all these initiatives that actually produce good results. It's more complicated, it's more difficult, but they focused on this capacity that we have inside of us. So my question to you is, do you think that there is such a capacity in an average citizen? And if it's there, do you think that in an ideal system that you start to sketch in your book, would these experts have a responsibility to nurture this potential? Should they do something about that or not?
Okay, 2 minutes, Jason. Come on. What is the way forward?
You know, at one point I was going to call this book Against Politics, and my editor suggested calling it Against Democracy because it would sell more copies. And part of what I really don't want democracy to pervade people's lives. I want to downgrade the status attached to political knowledge and being political, upgrades the status of other things. In another book, I have a theory of civic virtue that's very expansive, and I say we should be celebrating things other than politics. To be civically virtuous might mean that you're a baker or an auto mechanic rather than like a politician or a political philosopher. I'm worried about Fishkin. So like as you saw in like chapter 3, there's like a summary of kind of like the various bits of evidence about political democracy. And I think Fishkin's onto something, but my worry is it just looks like here's hundreds of studies and most of them have fairly negative results or even neutral results, which are really quite negative if you think about it. And then there's Fishkin, who's getting positive results, but he's kind of a minority guy. He's also like, I'm not saying he's dishonest, but he's motivated to get good results, you know, and that might affect his work in some way. So it'd be great if we can make deliberative democracy work. Awesome, let's do it. But I'm just skeptical that we can based upon the sort of summary of all that literature. As far as incentives, so here's a thought. People don't learn things because you forget the basic information economics is you keep and retain information if the value to you is higher than the cost of getting it. So you know information if it's useful or if you find it interesting, otherwise you forget it. So one possible thing we could do is something called like the National Voter Achievement Exam. Every year, 6 weeks before an election takes place, the government will have a quiz of just basic knowledge, and you go and take the quiz. And if you get a 90% or higher, you get a $1,000 tax credit. If you get, say, an 80 to 90 on it, you get a $500 tax credit, you get a 70 to 80, you get a $100 tax credit, 100 pounds, make it pounds, so here. And if you get 70 or lower, you get nothing. So you could pay people to be knowledgeable. I don't know if there's any other like incentive that would really work. Because I think, unfortunately, a lot of times when you talk to the Greens or you talk about, certain people have like utopian kind of schemes of how democracy is supposed to work, if only we can just radically change human nature. And I'm just pretty skeptical that we can do that. I mean, I'd love it if we could, but I think the only thing we could really do is maybe pay people to know something. As far as this goes, like, I'm gonna let go a secret. I think justice requires anarchism. A perfectly just society has to be an anarchist society. In the same way that like, you don't have criminal courts in a just society. They're a reaction to injustice, right? In a perfectly just society, there's no crime, there are no criminal courts. In a perfectly just society, you don't have government either. So this is not meant to be, and not only that, like those things just for utopian reasons that like anarchism would be best, but I'm more open to the idea that anarchism can work than most people are. I think work by people like Elinor Ostrom and a few others like tends to illustrate that it could work better than we give it credit for. So what I'm
Ostrom actually works within a democracy. I mean, her ideas about public commons
Yeah.
still work within it, and that was really my question to you. It's not either anarchism or democracy, but actually how can we have a form of consensus operating within a larger voting
Yeah.
system?
So I think like it's worth exploring these things. And the book is in a sense conservative in the sense that I'm like, I'm just going to take it for granted we have these nation states with powerful governments and ask, should we maybe shift them to a different direction? That said, I'm worried about, say, consensus rule, and this might not be what you have in mind, but I mentioned James Buchanan before in a book called Calculus of Consent, where he talked about different kinds of voting rules. And one idea would be like, for certain rules, you literally have to have every single person agree or the rule doesn't get passed. And there's some problems with that because now you give people a very strong incentive to hold out in exchange for more. Like, oh, I'm going to say no unless you all give me more cookies. And so he basically says, like, if you kind of like do all the economics of it, he's like, what you want is better the majority rule, like super majoritarianism, but you don't want perfect consensus because then you give people the wrong incentives on the other side. I think he's probably right about that, and you don't.
That's like great. Thanks very much, Jason. Thank you all very much for coming, and there are books and